when a quiet single-dad janitor dove into freezing ocean waters to rescue a Navy officer trapped in a sinking jet. He thought it would end there. But by sunrise, 5 Humvees surrounded his small cabin, each carrying a secret that would change everything. Before we begin this extraordinary true-of-heart story of courage, truth, and redemption, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more cinematic tales of kindness, quiet heroes, and the miracles that still live among us. Now, let's begin. The morning tide lapped gently against the worn wooden posts beneath the Navy maintenance docks. The air smelled of salt machine oil and the faint memory of jet fuel, the kind of scent only men who once flew could still notice. Ben Turner stood alone beside the hangar's rear entrance mop in hand eyes distant. The janitor's patch on his faded coveralls was stitched crookedly by his son Tommy, yet he wore it with quiet pride. His movements were unhurried, but deliberate, the kind that belonged to someone who once knew how to control chaos at 20,000 feet. Every morning began the same. He unlocked the tool closets, swept the concrete floors, and checked that the younger mechanics had left no tools lying around. No one at the base asked questions about the tall, calm man who cleaned more like a craftsman than a laborer. He never talked about his past, and when the younger pilots joked about the janitor who polishes jet wings like they're gold, Ben only smiled and kept working. From across the open hangar, the sunlight cut through the wide bay doors, scattering over the rows of aircraft birds with steel feathers sleeping under blue tarps. Tommy's laughter echoed from outside, where he sat by the shoreline skipping stones. Ben's eyes softened. The boy was everything that kept him tethered to life after the world went silent 6 years ago. At home, a small cabin near the dunes, mornings were slow and sacred. Ben cooked breakfast the same way his wife once did, scrambled eggs with too much butter and black coffee so strong it could dissolve grief. Tommy always added honey to his father's cup when he wasn't looking, claiming you smile more when it's sweet, Dad. Today was no different. After breakfast, Ben walked Tommy to the edge of the base fence where the school bus came. The boy's backpack was patched and sun-faded, one strap mended with aircraft wiring Ben had salvaged years ago. "You think I can come to the hangar after school?" Tommy asked, hopeful. Ben nodded. "Only if you finish your homework first," the boy saluted with mock seriousness. Aye, Captain." Ben chuckled, a rare sound that carried warmth instead of pain. When the bus disappeared into the morning haze, he looked up at the open sky, the vast blue that both healed and haunted him. The horizon shimmered with promise, but for men like him, it always carried a shadow. By mid-morning, the wind shifted. Clouds rolled in low and fast, darkening the sea's edge. The chatter around the maintenance yard turned uneasy as technicians looked up from their work. Ben noticed it first, that distinctive whine of an F-Series jet engine straining too hard. He stepped out into the open field, eyes narrowing. Above the coastline, a silver shape tore through the clouds, smoke trailing behind its right wing. "That's not a test run," Ben muttered. The sirens hadn't gone off yet, but his pulse already had. Years of instincts awoke like a buried reflex. He could tell from the pitch of the engine that the pilot was fighting hydraulic failure. And from the way the nose dipped, he knew they wouldn't make the airstrip. He dropped the mop, sprinting toward the cliffside overlook, where the sea met the rocks. Below, the jet's silhouette cut across the water, too low, too slow. Tommy, walking back from the school gate, froze at the sight. Dad Ben's voice was calm, the kind that came from a man who'd faced storms before. "Stay back, kiddo." The next second, the jet clipped the waves, an explosion of mist and metal, then disappeared beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the world roared back to life. Ben kicked off his boots and dove. The ocean swallowed him whole cold, crushing electric with panic. He forced his body downward through the chaos of bubbles and broken glass. The wreck lay angled in the sand, its fuselage split open, a trail of air bubbles, escaping like desperate prayers. Inside, through a jagged window, he saw her, a woman in a white Navy uniform trapped in the cockpit unconscious. Her blonde hair floated like a halo around her pale face. Ben's lungs screamed for air, but he pushed closer. The canopy was twisted shut, its hinges jammed. He reached for a loose wrench drifting nearby, a mechanic's tool turned weapon against death, and struck the frame again and again until the glass fractured. He forced the gap, wide water rushing in, and pulled her free. Her uniform's metals shimmered like stars, sinking into darkness. The descent had stirred a storm of debris. Metal shards scraped his arm, drawing thin ribbons of red that spiraled upward in the current. He didn't care. He wrapped an arm around her chest and kicked hard toward the faint blur of sunlight above. When they broke the surface, Ben gasped for air, dragging her toward the shore. The wind howled. Salt water burned his eyes, and Tommy's voice echoed faintly from the cliff. "Dad, Dad, are you okay?" Ben coughed hard, checked the woman's pulse, faint but there. He tilted her head, performed compressions, the rhythm steady and sure. After a long moment, she sputtered, water spilling from her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, frightened alive. "You're safe," Ben said softly. "You're out." She stared at him, trying to focus through the haze. Who are you?" He almost smiled. "Just the janitor." Before she could reply, she fainted again from exhaustion. Ben looked toward the sea, the jet's tail disappearing beneath the waves claimed by silence. Sirens finally wailed from the base trucks, rushing toward the shore, but Ben stayed beside her hand, steady on her shoulder, until the medics arrived. When they asked his name for the report, he hesitated, then handed them his worn work rag embroidered with fading blue letters, U.S. Air Force, Turner. That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep by the couch, Ben sat alone on the porch, staring out at the moonlit water. His arm was bandaged, his mind restless. He had saved a stranger, but something in her face, in the calm authority, even in near death, stirred a memory he couldn't name. In the distance, the waves rolled gently again, as if the sea itself wanted to pretend nothing had happened. But Ben knew better. Calm never lasted long in a world built on secrets. Tomorrow, something would come for him. And this time, he wouldn't be able to hide. The morning after the crash felt quieter than it should have been. The ocean, usually a restless chorus, now lay smooth and watchful, as if holding its breath. Ben Turner stood on the porch of his weathered cabin, the same spot where he'd sat last night, staring toward the horizon, where the jet had gone down. The scent of salt and burnt fuel still clung faintly to the air, carried by the wind that brushed through the dunes. He hadn't slept much every time he closed his eyes. He saw her face underwater again, pale and still framed by the fractured cockpit glass. Inside, Tommy stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, did they find her? The lady from the plane?" Ben poured a cup of coffee and stared into the steam. "They did. She's at the base hospital. She's gonna be okay." Tommy smiled the way only an 8-year-old could when the world still made sense. "You saved her. Like in the movies." Ben's gaze drifted back to the sea. It wasn't like the movies, kiddo. He didn't say the rest, that sometimes saving someone meant bringing your own ghosts back to life. By the time he arrived at the naval yard, the atmosphere had shifted. Soldiers stood guard by the hangar entrances. Investigators in dark suits were already swarming near the shoreline. The crash had turned into an event, a line of official vehicles' cameras, and clipped voices carrying authority. When Ben entered the hangar, the younger mechanics greeted him with nervous energy. "Hey, Turner," one said. "Heard some janitor jumped in the water last night. They're saying he pulled a Navy officer out of the wreck himself. That true?" Ben didn't answer. He simply grabbed his mop and started on the floors, as if scrubbing away the rumor before it could stain anything. But the whispers followed him. He used to fly, right? No, he's just maintenance. Man, nobody dives into a burning jet unless they've done that before. He ignored them, but his hands were trembling slightly. Every sound, the clang of tools, the hum of the lights echoed louder than usual. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter lifted off carrying evidence toward the investigation center. He tried to bury himself in routine, clean rinse, repeat. But the world no longer felt routine. By noon, a black SUV rolled up to the hangar. The driver stepped out first. Then the passenger door opened, and she appeared. Commander Diana Brooks. Alive. Her uniform was crisp again, her hair pulled back, but her face carried the faint bruises of impact. And yet, even bandaged, she had the kind of presence that made conversations stop mid-sentence. The officers straightened as she passed. Ben froze, gripping his mop handle like an anchor. Their eyes met for the first time on dry land. Hers flickered with recognition, the flicker of someone who had been pulled from the edge of death and now saw her rescuer not as a stranger, but as an enigma. She crossed the hangar toward him. "You're Ben Turner." He didn't correct her. He just nodded once. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. Her voice carried command, but there was a thread of sincerity woven through it. "They told me you dove in before rescue units arrived. That you broke open the cockpit." Ben's tone was steady, humble. Anyone would have done the same. She smiled faintly. No, they wouldn't have. For a moment, silence hung between them, filled with the hum of the generators and the faint echo of seagulls outside. Then she noticed the patch on his coverall. Custodial staff. Her brow furrowed. "You work here as janitorial?" "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze lingered longer than necessary, studying him like a puzzle that didn't quite fit the frame. "Funny," she said at last. "You knew how to approach a downed aircraft underwater. You hit the emergency latch exactly where it was weakest. That's not something a janitor would know." Ben gave the smallest shrug. "Lucky guess." She tilted her head slightly, almost amused. "Luck doesn't punch through titanium." Before he could respond, an officer called for her from the other side of the hangar. She gave him a long, curious look before walking away. As she disappeared behind the rolling doors, Ben exhaled slowly. He had spent 6 years burying who he was. Now, one act of instinct had unearthed it all. That evening, when Ben picked Tommy up from the schoolyard, the boy ran to him, waving a folded newspaper. "Dad, you're on the news." Ben stopped cold. On the front page was a grainy photograph, him half submerged, pulling Diana Brooks toward the shore. The headline read, "Unknown Civilian Saves Navy Commander in Ocean Rescue." Tommy's eyes gleamed. "They called you a hero." Ben folded the paper carefully, his jaw tightening. "Heroes don't need headlines, Tommy. But everyone at school says he put a gentle hand on his son's shoulder." "Let's just have dinner, okay?" Tommy looked confused but nodded. At home, as they ate quietly by the window, headlights flickered in the distance. Ben looked out and saw the silhouettes of military vehicles rolling slowly down the coastal road, their tires crunching gravel. For a brief moment, he thought it was a patrol convoy. But then one stopped, right in front of their house. The door knocked twice, firm official. Ben opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing at attention. Behind them, parked in the moonlight, were 5 Humvees, lined up like silent witnesses. Mr. Turner, one asked. "Commander Brooks requests your presence at Naval Command. Immediate transport." Tommy peeked from behind his father's leg, eyes wide. "Dad, what's going on?" Ben knelt down beside him, brushing the boy's hair gently. "Nothing to worry about, buddy. I'll be back soon." The boy hesitated. "Promise, I promise." He stood straightened and nodded to the officers. "Let's go." The Humvee door closed behind him with a heavy metallic thud, sealing him once again in a world he had tried so hard to leave behind. As the convoy moved down the dark coastal road, Ben watched the reflection of the moon ripple across the ocean through the small side window. The same sea that had swallowed a jet yesterday now glimmered under the stars, calm again, pretending innocence. But he could feel it beneath that calm, something deeper was stirring. The woman he'd saved wasn't just anyone, and whatever had brought that jet down wasn't just a mechanical failure. Fate had reached into his quiet life and pulled him back into the current. And as the convoy climbed toward the naval base under the dark blue sky, Ben Turner knew the storm hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The convoy of 5 Humvees cut through the mist along the coastal road, their engines growling like distant thunder. The rising sun painted the ocean in copper and gold, but inside the lead vehicle, silence reigned. Ben Turner sat in the back seat beside a stone-faced sergeant, his calloused hands resting on his knees. The rhythmic hum of the engine reminded him of old missions transport runs, at dawn the smell of oil and fear. He hadn't worn a uniform in years, but the cadence of military life was still etched into his bones. Outside the window, the landscape shifted from sleepy fishing docks to the steel geometry of Naval Command Headquarters, a fortress of glass and concrete overlooking the sea. Soldiers saluted as the convoy approached the gates. Ben exhaled slowly. The last time he'd been inside an operation command center, he'd been a captain in the Air Force. That day ended in smoke fire and a folded flag. The Humvee rolled to a stop in front of the command building. The driver opened the door, and Ben stepped out. His gray work jacket looked out of place amid a sea of blue uniforms. Officers glanced his way, some curious, others suspicious. Commander Diana Brooks waited at the entrance, her expression unreadable. She wore her full dress uniform, now dark navy blue with silver trim ribbons perfectly aligned. The morning light caught the edge of her cap, tracing her profile in a cold gleam. "Mr. Turner," she said as he approached, "thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" Ben asked, though. Not unkindly. Her lips curved slightly. "Not really." She gestured toward the doors. "Walk with me." Inside the corridors buzzed with restrained tension. Officers spoke in clipped tones. Analysts carried tablets filled with flight data. The base was in controlled chaos, the kind that followed any high-level incident. Diana led him to a glass-walled briefing room overlooking the docks. On the table lay a spread of printed photos, wreckage black box schematics, and aerial scans. A wall-mounted monitor looped footage from a drone circling the crash site. She motioned for him to sit. "I know you didn't ask for this, but I needed to see you before the inquiry begins." Ben sat across from her, folding his rough hands together. "I already gave a statement to the shore patrol. I read it." She tapped a file. "It's concise. I'm not much of a writer." Diana leaned back, studying him. "You said the aircraft's hydraulics failed before impact." You're sure Ben's gaze flicked to the image on the monitor, an FA-18 Hornet, its right wing torn open like a wound. "Yes. The pitch oscillation pattern in your descent was classic hydraulic failure. You were losing control of your right stabilizer." Her brow arched. "That's a very specific assessment for a janitor." He didn't respond. His silence was confirmation enough. Diana crossed her arms. "You're ex-Air Force, aren't you?" Ben stared at the table. "I was." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. After a moment, she spoke softly, almost to herself. "I knew it. The way you moved underwater, the way you found the latch. There's no way a civilian could have done that." Ben looked up, eyes steady but guarded. "Let's just say I've been in a cockpit before. A long time ago." Her tone softened. "Why leave? He hesitated as if weighing how much of himself to reveal. Because sometimes, flying isn't the hardest part. Landing is. The quiet between them was heavy like a room holding its breath. An older man entered, then his uniform marked with the insignia of a colonel. His expression was sharp, impatient. "Commander Brooks," he barked. "We're still waiting on your debrief." "Who's this civilian witness?" she replied. "Benjamin Turner." The colonel's gaze hardened. "The janitor." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." Diana didn't flinch. "He saved my life, sir." "Good for him," the colonel said curtly. "Still doesn't make him an expert." He turned to Ben. "You can go. We've got the data we need." Ben rose slowly. "Glad to help." As he turned to leave, Diana spoke quietly. "Wait. Mr. Turner, one more question." He stopped, glancing back. She tapped one of the photos, an image of the jet's damaged engine. "You recognized this model immediately, didn't you?" Ben's eyes lingered on the picture. The engine bore a faint serial stamp, PX09B, a prototype variant. He remembered working on it years ago during his engineering cross-assignment, back when the Air Force collaborated with Naval R&D. The design was supposed to have been scrapped after a fatal test malfunction. But here it was again. He kept his tone neutral. "Just looks familiar, that's all." Her eyes narrowed. "Right." Outside, the salt wind hit his face as he left the building. The 5 Humvees waited silently by the curb. Tommy would be home from school soon, probably making grilled cheese sandwiches and watching old cartoons. Ben wanted to believe this morning was over, that he could return to normal. But as he walked away, a fragment of conversation drifted through an open office window, 2 analysts talking inside. Black box data's corrupted. Someone tampered with it before upload. The engine ID isn't in the registry. That aircraft shouldn't even exist. Ben's pulse tightened. He paused by the flagpole, staring at the colors fluttering against the wind. His instincts, the ones he'd buried beneath years of janitorial quiet, flared awake again. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He turned back toward the headquarters just in time to see Commander Brooks exit the main doors, briefing folder in hand. She stopped when she saw him still standing there. Couldn't leave without saying goodbye, she teased, though her eyes were serious. Just making sure the world's still turning. She nodded slowly. Sometimes it spins too fast. For a heartbeat, they stood there, neither sure what to say next. The sunlight caught her hair glinting against the silver pins on her uniform. "Commander?" He finally said, "That engine, you should have your techs check the serial number against archived models. You might find something that doesn't belong in your current fleet." Diana frowned, while he gave a small, weary smile. "Because I helped build it." Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, the colonel's voice echoed from the steps. "Brooks' briefing room now." She turned toward him, then looked back at Ben. "Stay reachable, Mr. Turner." "I usually am," he said. She walked away, leaving him under the flagpole with the wind tugging at his sleeves. That night, Ben and Tommy sat by the small window overlooking the ocean. The boy drew pictures on a notepad, Humvees helicopters, a stick-figure dad wearing a cape. "Did they say, 'Thank you'?" Tommy asked. Ben smiled faintly. "They did." "Good. You always tell me that when someone helps you, you should say thank you." "Yeah," Ben murmured, staring out at the waves. "That's a good rule." He didn't tell Tommy that he'd noticed something today. Something in the commander's eyes that said she wasn't done with him yet. And something in that engine's serial number that whispered of secrets buried too deep. Outside, the sea shimmered under the moonlight. From afar, it looked peaceful. Again, endless and clean. But Ben knew better. Still, waters never stay still for long. And when they moved, someone always drowned. That night, the ocean seemed to whisper secrets against the shore, the kind that kept Ben Turner awake long after Tommy had fallen asleep. The rhythmic pulse of the waves outside the cabin echoed the steady thump of his heart, and in the half-darkness, he found himself staring at the faint scar that ran across his forearm, a scar from another lifetime, another sky. He'd thought the past was buried under the dust of hangar floors and the laughter of his son. But seeing that engine again, PX-09B, the ghost of a project that should have been erased, had cracked open a door he'd welded shut years ago. Ben leaned back in his chair, the faint light of the lamp flickering against a framed photo of his late wife, Emily. Her smile was soft, almost shy, like the dawn after a long storm. He brushed a thumb across the glass. "I tried to keep my promise," he whispered, "to stay away from all of it." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the bay. The next morning came with rain. The sky was gray, and the air carried that heavy stillness that precedes bad news. Ben was scrubbing the hangar floor when a voice called his name. "Turner." He turned to see Commander Diana Brooks standing in the doorway, rain glistening on her cap. Her tone was brisk, but her eyes told a different story, sleepless, restless questioning. "Walk with me," she said. They stepped out into the rain, heading toward the North Pier, away from the ears of officers and the constant hum of machinery. "Colonel Blake shut down the investigation this morning," Diana said, voice low. "Says the crash was pilot error. The black box data's missing." Ben stopped walking. "Missing." She nodded grimly. "Wiped from the system. The maintenance logs were sealed, too. Someone doesn't want this looked at." Rain pattered softly on her uniform. Ben's gaze drifted toward the horizon, a long gray line where the sea met the clouds. "That engine," he said quietly. "I helped design part of its control system. It was meant to be retired after a fatal malfunction during testing. A contractor named Aegis Dynamics paid for a hush job. 3 pilots died before the model was grounded. Including..." He hesitated. "Including my wife." Diana turned to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your wife." She was a test pilot. Air Force. She took the PX-09 up for a final diagnostics flight after the recall order. Something in the system overrode manual control. She didn't stand a chance. The rain blurred everything for a moment. Sky, sea, and memory merging into one. Diana's voice was gentle, but steady. "You tried to expose it." Ben gave a bitter laugh. "I tried. I filed reports. I begged the safety board to review the code. Colonel Blake was overseeing the joint project back then. He called me a liability and forced me out." She exhaled slowly, connecting the pieces. "And now, he's the one classifying this crash." Ben nodded. "He's cleaning his trail. That engine shouldn't have been anywhere near your jet. Someone brought it back under a different contract." They stopped by the end of the pier, the ocean swirling dark beneath them. Diana clenched her jaw. "If what you're saying is true, it's not just corruption, it's criminal negligence. It's murder," Ben said quietly. Back at the base, they kept their distance in public. But in the shadows of Hangar 13, a forgotten storage bay, where old aircraft parts lay under dusty tarps, they met again that evening. Diana had managed to pull a partial data drive from the wreckage before the investigators sealed it. She handed it to Ben like contraband. "I shouldn't have this," she said, "but something told me you might know how to read it." Ben took the drive, carefully studying its label. "Encrypted. Same firmware signature as the old PX models. You can decode it." He gave a small nod. "If I can find my old tools." That night after Tommy went to bed, Ben lifted the loose floorboard beneath his desk and retrieved a small metal box. Inside were relics of a life he'd abandoned: a battered laptop, a flash drive marked USAF Systems, and a folded photograph of his flight squadron. He powered the old machine, its fan humming like an aging heart. Lines of code flickered to life across the screen. Hours passed. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder growled, and Tommy stirred in his sleep down the hall. Ben barely noticed. His fingers moved with instinct, bypassing encryption layers he hadn't seen in years. Then a breakthrough. The file decrypted with a low beep, revealing the flight data overlay. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Someone tampered with it. Mid-flight, he muttered. Manual override disabled. Automatic re-engagement triggered remotely. They forced the crash. A voice came from the doorway, so it wasn't an accident. Ben turned. Diana stood there soaked from the rain, having returned unannounced. Her eyes scanned the code on the screen. She didn't ask how he'd done it. She just whispered, "Blake's covering it up, isn't he?" Ben nodded. He's been covering it for years. Tommy's small footsteps padded into the room, his hair tousled from sleep. Dad Ben quickly minimized the screen. "Hey, buddy." "Couldn't sleep," the boy blinked, noticing Diana. "Hi, Mom." She smiled gently. "Hi there, soldier." Ben knelt beside his son. "It's late. Back to bed, okay? Are you in trouble?" the boy asked softly. Ben paused, then kissed the top of his head. "No, kiddo. Just fixing something that's broken." Tommy nodded sleepily and shuffled away. When he was gone, Diana looked at Ben, not as an officer, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose faith in the system you once swore to protect. "What are you going to do with the data?" she asked. He stared at the drive in his hand, the rain echoing against the roof. The truth isn't enough by itself. People like Blake don't fall because of truth. They fall because of proof. Then we'll get proof. He looked up, surprised at her choice of words. "We." Diana straightened her eyes, clear and resolute. "I can access the restricted archives tomorrow. If the PX program was reactivated, there'll be procurement trails funding approvals contractors. We follow the money." Ben studied her face for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. "You realize they'll come for us if they know we're digging." "I'm already on their list," she said, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. "Might as well make it worth it." The storm outside intensified, waves crashing against the rocks like a drumbeat. Ben closed the laptop and stood beside the window, watching lightning split the horizon. "You know," he said softly, "the last time I tried to expose this, I lost everything." Diana stepped closer, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "Then this time, you won't do it alone." He met her gaze, steady, fierce, and unafraid. For the first time in years, something inside him shifted. Not hope, not yet, but purpose. The rain had passed by dawn, leaving the air heavy with the smell of salt and ozone. The ocean lay flat again, as if pretending nothing had happened, but Ben Turner knew better. Storms never really ended. They just hid behind quiet skies. He stood outside the cabin with a mug of black coffee, watching Tommy chase gulls down by the beach. Inside, on the worn wooden table, the decrypted data drive blinked faintly like a heartbeat. Lines of code and flight telemetry scrolled across his old laptop, fragments of truth, waiting to ignite something far larger than either he or Diana Brooks could yet imagine. The night before, they had crossed a line together, one neither of them could uncross. Diana had slipped him the data under the cover of rain. Now the two of them were bound by what they knew. By mid-morning, Diana arrived in civilian clothes, jeans, windbreaker hair, tied back in a loose knot that made her look more like a schoolteacher than a Navy commander. She moved with the alertness of someone who hadn't slept, eyes darting over her shoulder before stepping inside. "Did anyone follow you?" Ben asked quietly. "Not that I could tell," she said, setting down a folder thick with printouts. "But the moment I accessed the procurement database, my clearance got flagged. Colonel Blake's office will know someone was snooping." Ben frowned. That didn't take long. Diana spread out the papers on the table. Invoices, internal memos, and subcontractor lists, all tied to Aegis Dynamics, The same defense contractor Ben had mentioned. She pointed to one highlighted line. See this? Aegis reactivated the PX engine contract under a new division name, Neptune Systems. Blake authorized the budget transfer himself 6 months ago. He's been hiding it under the Naval Research Fund. Ben scanned the page, his jaw tightening. He's laundering experimental parts through research grants. That's why the jet wasn't on the registry. It wasn't supposed to exist. Diana nodded grimly. And the test flight I was assigned to wasn't a test, Ben said. It was a live validation. They wanted to see if the new control module could override pilot input without detection. She stared at him. You mean they were testing a remote control system on a manned flight? He met her eyes. On you. The weight of that truth hung between them, heavy and cold. Diana's voice broke the silence. We need to report this to Naval Oversight. Now. Ben shook his head. No. You go through official channels and Blake buries it. He's done it before. You need proof that can't be erased. She paced, frustration tightening her movements. Then, what we just sit here, with evidence that no one will believe. Ben leaned back, rubbing his temples. There's a copy of the original PX-09 flight software somewhere before it was rewritten. If we can find it, we can show how they inserted the override protocol. And where would that be? He hesitated. I might know. The archive lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But it's sealed. Military access only. Diana met his gaze. I still have clearance, for now. Ben sighed. You'd risk your career. I already risked my life, she said simply. That afternoon, they drove to the old maintenance hangar to gather more information. The place was nearly empty, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off metal walls. Ben searched the storage lockers where he used to work years ago. He found an old schematic, the PX control unit's architecture yellowed with age. His fingers traced the familiar lines, like touching the bones of a buried secret. As they studied the blueprints, a shadow fell across the hangar doorway. Commander Brooks, a voice called, calm and precise. They turned to see Colonel David Blake standing with 2 military police officers. His presence filled the space like a toxin, too clean, too still. Good to see you back on your feet, he said to Diana, his tone dripping with practiced civility. And you must be the hero, Janitor. Ben said nothing. Blake's eyes glinted. You've been busy, accessing restricted files, tampering with crash evidence. Very unlike you, Commander. Diana stepped forward, unflinching. We found inconsistencies in the data, sir. We believe the PX system may have been tampered with. Blake smirked. That's a bold choice of words. He looked at Ben. You should know better than to play in fires you can't control. Some things are classified for a reason. Ben's voice was low but steady. Like the reason my wife died. Blake's expression flickered for just a second, the faintest crack in his composure. You're chasing ghosts, Turner. The world moved on. Maybe Ben said, stepping closer, but ghosts have long memories. The colonel's smile vanished. He motioned to his men. Search them. The MPs moved forward, but Diana snapped. That's an abuse of protocol, Blake said coldly, is what keeps this country from collapsing under the weight of people like you. Ben's mind raced. He slid the folder of printouts beneath the open engine panel behind him. The soldiers frisked him, but found nothing. Blake watched in silence, then said, If either of you value what's left of your careers, or your lives, you'll forget whatever fantasy you've built. Accidents happen all the time in this line of work. Don't become another one. With that, he turned and walked out, boots echoing like gunshots on concrete. When the hangar doors finally closed behind him, Diana exhaled shakily. He knows. Ben nodded. He's warning us. What do we do now? He looked at her, his voice calm but resolute. Now we stop warning and start fighting back. That night, lightning flickered again over the water. Ben returned home late, exhausted, but sharper than ever. He checked on Tommy asleep, clutching his stuffed airplane. He lingered at the doorway for a long moment. Diana sat at the table reviewing the data again. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "He'll come after us. You know that." Ben nodded. "Then we make sure the truth gets out before he can bury it again." He pulled a small USB stick from his pocket, a duplicate of the decrypted flight data. "We split it. You take one copy, I take another. If they come for one of us, the other still has the truth." Diana accepted it, her fingers brushing his briefly. "You trust me that much. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." She smiled faintly. "For what it's worth, Turner. I don't scare easy." He returned her look, something unspoken, passing between them. Not romance, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of faith. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, but closing in. The truth was burning now, and there would be no turning back. The storm had moved inland by morning, leaving streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds, sharp golden lines slicing across the gray sea. To anyone passing by, the Turner cabin looked peaceful, ordinary. But inside, quiet had become an illusion. The events at the hangar still echoed in Ben's mind. Blake's cold voice, the threat in every syllable. He knew what was coming. Blake didn't issue warnings. He eliminated problems. Ben had faced danger before, but this time it was different. He wasn't a pilot anymore. He was a father. Tommy sat at the kitchen table building a tiny model airplane from scraps of balsa wood. The morning light shimmered on his blonde hair as he hummed softly, completely unaware of the storm brewing beyond his small world. "Dad," he said without looking up, "are you and Miss Diana in trouble?" Ben froze halfway through pouring his coffee. "Why do you ask that?" "She looked scared yesterday," Tommy said simply. "And you? You look like you're thinking too hard." Ben smiled faintly, trying to hide the ache behind it. "Sometimes adults just have things to figure out. Nothing you need to worry about." Tommy set the little airplane down. "You always tell me that when something's bad." Ben crouched beside him, meeting the boy's steady gaze. "Listen to me, kiddo. No matter what happens, you remember this. Doing the right thing can be scary, but it's still right." "Understand," Tommy nodded. "Even if people get mad." "Especially then," Ben said. He tousled his son's hair, forcing a smile. But as he straightened, he caught movement outside the window, a pair of black sedans slowing near the dirt road that led to the cabin. His blood went cold. Within minutes, he'd packed a small bag, passports, cash, the backup data drive, and Tommy's asthma inhaler. "Tommy, we're going to take a little trip," he said, keeping his voice calm, like an adventure. The boy blinked. "But what about school? It's Saturday," Ben lied gently. "Grab your jacket." He was reaching for the truck keys when a knock rattled the door. Firm controlled the rhythm of trained men. Ben's instincts screamed. He motioned for Tommy to stay back, slipped his old sidearm from the top shelf, the one he'd sworn never to touch again, and moved quietly to the window. Outside, two men in Navy police uniforms stood beside an unmarked car. Their posture was too rigid, their hands too close to their weapons. A voice called through the door. "Mr. Turner, open up. We need to ask you a few questions about Commander Brooks." Ben didn't move. Then another voice, sharp and commanding. "This is official Navy business. If you don't comply, we'll enter by force." Ben glanced at Tommy, wide-eyed, clutching his model plane. He could hear the faint hum of a second vehicle pulling up behind the first. It wasn't a visit. It was a trap. He grabbed Tommy's hand. Back door. Quiet. They slipped out the rear exit, moving down the slope toward the dunes. The ocean stretched before them, cold and endless, But Ben wasn't heading for the water. A half-mile inland lay an old boathouse he'd once helped repair, forgotten, abandoned. Behind them, the front door of the cabin burst open. Shouts followed. Turner's stop gunmetal glinted through the morning light. Ben tightened his grip on Tommy's hand. "Run, son! Don't look back!" They sprinted through the tall grass boots sinking in wet sand. Bullets cracked in the distance, warning shots not yet lethal. Ben dove behind a dune, pulling Tommy close, until the sounds faded. The boy's small chest heaved against his arm. "Dad," Tommy whispered. "Why are they chasing us?" "Because they're scared of something we know," Ben said softly. "But it's okay. We'll be fine." He checked his watch. If he could reach Diana before Blake's men did, they still had a chance. By noon, they reached the boathouse. The structure leaned with age, its wood faded and warped. Inside, it smelled of salt rope and forgotten years. Ben guided Tommy to a small storage alcove near the back, tucked under a staircase. "Stay here, okay? No matter what you hear." Tommy's eyes filled with worry. "Are you leaving?" Ben knelt, his voice steady but gentle. "Just for a bit. I need to make sure a friend's safe. I'll come right back for you. Promise." The boy hesitated, then threw his arms around his father's neck. "I trust you, Dad." Those words hit harder than any bullet. Ben stepped outside, heart pounding, and pulled out the satellite phone Diana had given him. It rang twice before she answered. "Turner Blake's men came to my house," he said. "They're not investigating, they're hunting. You need to get out of the base." There was a pause, followed by a faint hiss of static. Too late. "They've suspended me. Security's been ordered to detain anyone connected to the PX data leak." Ben's jaw clenched. "Where are you now, East Access Road? I've got 2 MPs tailing me." "Head toward the coastal bridge," he said quickly. "There's an old boathouse by the inlet. I'll meet you there." But the line went dead. He cursed under his breath, tossed the phone into the sand, and took off running. By the time he reached the road, he could hear engines. Diana's silver sedan sped toward him, tires kicking up gravel. Behind her, 2 black SUVs closed in fast. Ben waved her down. "This way." She swerved sharply, following him off-road toward the dunes. The SUVs followed, headlights cutting through the mist. At the last second, Ben grabbed a length of heavy chain from the boathouse dock, looped it around a post, and swung it across the narrow path just as the first SUV rounded the corner. The vehicle hit the chain with a metallic scream, jerking to a halt. The second swerved, crashing into the sandbank. Smoke and curses filled the air. "Go," Ben shouted. Diana accelerated toward the boathouse, stopping just long enough for him to jump into the passenger seat. She was shaking, but her eyes were sharp. "You all right?" He nodded. "Tommy's safe inside. We have to move before they regroup." "Where to?" He looked toward the horizon, the base barely visible in the distance. Somewhere they won't think to look. Somewhere high enough to breathe. Diana exhaled shakily, then started the engine again. "You really think we can run from them?" Ben met her gaze. "Not forever. But long enough to find the truth." As the car disappeared down the winding road, the Turner cabin burned in the distance. Flames licking skyward, consuming every trace of their quiet life. Tommy, hidden in the boathouse, watched the smoke rise, clutching his model airplane like a talisman. He didn't cry. He just whispered into the emptiness, repeating his father's words. "If you do what's right, even when it's hard, you stand tall." And somewhere down that lonely road, Ben Turner drove toward the unknown, a father carrying the weight of truth, a soldier reborn in the fire of his own past. The war he had escaped was calling him back. And this time, it wasn't just his life at stake. It was his son's future. The highway wound along the cliffs like a scar carved into the earth, the sea crashing far below. The sun was sinking behind heavy clouds, staining the horizon, the color of burnt copper. Inside the car, silence pressed thick between Ben Turner and Commander Diana Brooks. The engine hummed steady but tense, like a pulse that refused to calm. Behind them, the thin column of smoke from the Turner cabin still rose faintly. In the distance, the last remnants of a quiet life turned to ash. Ben didn't look back. He couldn't. He gripped the steering wheel hard enough for his knuckles to pale. They burned everything he said softly. Everything Tommy called home. Diana's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. They wanted to erase you. He gave a bitter laugh. They erased the wrong man. They drove until night swallowed the coastal road, finally pulling into the broken shell of an abandoned cannery overlooking the bay. The roof was half-collapsed, windows boarded, but it offered shelter, and more importantly, shadows. Diana got out first, scanning the perimeter. "We'll stay here until sunrise, then head north to the ridge roads. Less surveillance there." Ben nodded, killing the engine. "Tommy's still at the boathouse. It's safe for now. I'll go for him at first light." She hesitated. "Do you trust it, leaving him alone?" He met her gaze. "I trust my son more than I trust the Navy right now." Her eyes softened. "He's a brave kid." Ben looked toward the sea. He didn't learn that from cartoons. Inside, they found a dry corner near an old furnace. The air smelled faintly of rust and salt. Diana wrapped her jacket tighter and sank onto a crate. Ben rummaged through a toolbox, pulling out a portable radio and a dented thermos. "Coffee's cold, but still coffee," he said, handing it to her. She took a sip, grimaced, and smiled faintly. "That might be the strongest thing I've ever tasted." "It's a family recipe." They shared a quiet laugh, the first trace of normalcy since the chaos began. Then silence settled again, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things neither dared to say. Diana finally broke it. "When you told me about your wife, you said she was testing the PX-09. I can't stop thinking about that, about what it must have done to you." Ben stared at the flickering shadows on the wall. "It didn't just take her life. It took everything I believed in. I used to think the system worked, that truth meant something. But when they buried her death under paperwork, I realized honor isn't a policy. It's a choice." She listened quietly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes full of quiet understanding. "I walked away," he continued. "Started cleaning floors because that's all that was left. Something honest. Something I could control. No politics. No lies. Just soap and silence." And yet she said softly, "When you saw that jet fall, you didn't hesitate." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Maybe I was tired of silence." Diana looked down at her hands. "You saved me, Ben. I don't think you realize what that means. Not just my life, my faith. People like Blake make you forget why we ever swore an oath. But watching you, it reminded me." Their eyes met. Something unspoken moved between them, fragile, unfinished, but real. Later, the wind picked up rattling loose sheets of metal along the cannery walls. The radio crackled with bursts of static. Diana adjusted the frequency, trying to pick up a signal. "Any luck?" Ben asked. "Just encrypted chatter," she said. "Blake's locking down communication channels. They've issued a retrieval order on both of us. Figures." She glanced at him. "We can't run forever." "I know," he said. "That's why we don't run. We build." She frowned. Build what? A plan? While she studied the radio, Ben spread out a sheet of old paper and began sketching a rough map. "We'll need proof Blake can't deny. That means linking him directly to the PX engine funding." Diana nodded. "There's a secure data vault in the Navy's Northern Logistics Hub I accessed at once during procurement reviews. If he authorized those transfers, they'll be there." He marked the location. "You still have clearance for now. But the system will flag me the second I log in. Then we'll need a ghost entry, a signal reroute. I can handle that." Her head tilted. "You can hack the Navy's secure net." He gave a wry smile. Let's just say I built part of it." She laughed quietly, the sound small but genuine. "You really are full of surprises, Turner. Trust me," he said, "I'd rather not be." As the hours slipped by, the exhaustion caught up with them. Diana leaned against the wall, eyelids heavy. Ben sat opposite her, staring at the faint glow of the horizon, where the sea met the stars. He thought of Tommy, alone, waiting, clutching his model plane. Guilt twisted in his chest, sharp as wire. Diana stirred. "You're thinking about him?" He nodded. "He's all I have left." She smiled faintly. "He's lucky. Most kids grow up reading about heroes. Yours gets to live with one." Ben's voice was low. "Heroes don't run. They fight. And I've been running for 6 years." She reached across the small distance between them, her hand brushing his. "You stopped running the moment you pulled me out of that water." He met her gaze, and for a fleeting second, the walls of rank and duty, grief and fear, all of it fell away. There was just the sound of waves and the shared understanding of two people who had both lost and refused to surrender to the loss. The air between them was thick, fragile, and electric. Then, as if sensing how close they were to saying too much, she withdrew her hand. "You should get some rest," she murmured. "We'll need clear heads tomorrow." Ben nodded. "You too." Just before dawn, the world began to glow again, thin and blue. Diana was asleep, her head resting against her arm. Ben stood at the broken window, watching the light crawl across the sea. Somewhere out there, Blake's men were hunting. Somewhere inland, Tommy was waiting for his father to come back. Ben clenched his fists. Enough running, enough hiding. Today they'd start fighting back, not for revenge, but for truth, for his son, and for every name that had been buried under silence. He turned toward the sleeping commander and whispered not to wake her, but to remind himself, "This time, I'm finishing what they started." The ocean answered with a low, endless roar, as if it agreed. The first rays of dawn sliced across the bay, cutting through the cracked windows of the abandoned cannery. Dust shimmered like floating ash in the early light. Ben Turner stood by the broken window shoulders, tense, watching the horizon burn with gold. The ocean was calm again, deceptively so. It had always been like that, still on the surface, wild beneath. The same could be said for the storm building in his chest. Behind him, Commander Diana Brooks stirred awake. Her jacket had slipped from her shoulders, and the lines of exhaustion around her eyes deepened in the dim light. She blinked, meeting his gaze. "Morning already." "Yeah," Ben said softly. "It's time." The day before had changed everything. Their names were on every alert system in the state. Blake's task force had likely spread out across naval installations and civilian routes. They were fugitives now, not because they had done wrong, but because they had done right. Diana stretched her arms and approached the table where Ben's rough map still lay. Her eyes traced the route he'd marked northward. "If we make it to the logistics hub by tonight, we'll need 2 things, an access code and an untraceable uplink. The second I log into the system, they'll know it's me." Ben nodded. "I can mask your signature, route it through inactive maintenance ports, but we'll only get 1 shot." She smirked faintly. "Just like flying." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Except this time, if we crash, no one's coming for us." They moved fast after that, packing the few things they had, erasing footprints, disabling the car's GPS tracker. By mid-morning, they were on the road again, the cannery fading behind them like a ghost. The drive was quiet. Ben's thoughts wandered to Tommy. The boy would have woken by now, maybe searching for his father in the empty boathouse, maybe looking at the smoke on the horizon, where their home used to be. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I have to go back for him soon," he murmured. Diana glanced over. "We'll get him. First we end this." He nodded, but guilt sat like a stone in his stomach. By afternoon, They reached the outskirts of a small coastal town, a place called Greyhaven, all fishing docks and faded flags. Ben pulled into an old gas station. While he refueled, Diana ducked into a roadside diner to pick up supplies. When she returned, her expression had changed. "2 MPs inside," she whispered. "They showed my photo to the waitress." Ben's jaw clenched. "They're close." Before he could finish, a police cruiser pulled into the lot, lights flashing silently. "Get in," he said sharply. They sped off down the side road, tires spitting gravel. The cruiser followed, radio crackling. More lights appeared in the distance. Diana's voice was tight. "They've got checkpoints. Then we make our own road." Ben swung the car down an unmarked dirt path leading toward the coastal forest. The trees closed in, swallowing them in shadow. Branches scraped the windows. Behind them, sirens wailed closer now. They finally stopped in a clearing deep within the pines, the engine ticking as it cooled. Diana leaned forward, catching her breath. "They're not going to stop," she said. "I don't expect them to," Ben replied. "But if we can reach the transmission ridge near the old naval relay, we can upload the PX files to a public channel before they shut us down." She looked at him. "That would make you a traitor." He met her eyes. "No, it would make me a father who's tired of lying to his son about what honor means." For a long moment she said nothing, then nodded. "Then let's finish it." By nightfall, they reached the ridge. The structure loomed above them, a rusting steel tower from the Cold War era, long decommissioned. Its frame creaked in the wind, the metal glowing faintly under the moonlight. Ben unpacked his gear cables, the drive-a-field laptop. Diana stood guard, her sidearm, ready eyes scanning the tree line. "Signal strength?" she asked. "Low but workable," he said. "I can patch through the old military net. Once we send the files, it's over." He typed fast, his fingers sure despite the cold. The screen flickered, lines of encrypted data racing across. "Almost there," he murmured. Then from the darkness, headlights flared. A convoy of vehicles crested the hill Blake's men. "Down," Diana shouted, firing a warning shot. Bullets answered, slamming into the tower's base, sparks raining down. Ben dove for cover, clutching the laptop. "We're pinned," she yelled. "I just need 60 seconds. Ben, do it." She turned, eyes fierce, and returned fire, covering him as he worked. The old relay hummed alive, its dish rotating with a groan. He jammed the final connection, hit send, and watched the progress bar climb. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on." A grenade exploded nearby, the shockwave knocking him backward. His laptop flew from his hands, crashing against the ground. Smoke filled the air. Diana ran to him, coughing. "Are you hit?" He shook his head, blood trickling down his temple. "Transmission's running. 10 more seconds. Then we hold." They crouched behind a broken truck, exchanging gunfire with the advancing soldiers. The night blazed with light muzzle flashes cutting through the darkness, the tower glowing like a beacon. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine and sea salt. Then, just as the tower's lights reached full power, a roaring fireball erupted from the base fuel lines, ignited by stray bullets. Flames climbed skyward, devouring steel. Ben grabbed Diana's arm. "We have to move." "But the upload." "It's done." They stumbled down the ridge as the tower collapsed behind them in a storm of sparks and smoke. The ground shook, and the forest lit up with orange glow. From below, Blake's men shouted orders, but it was too late. The truth was out. They reached the shore near midnight, breathless and covered in soot. The distant fire still burned against the sky, a monument to what they had done. Diana leaned against a rock, exhausted. Did it really go through? Ben opened the damaged laptop. The screen flickered weakly, displaying the message, "Upload complete." Data broadcast, public channel, Naval Archives. He smiled for the first time in days. "Yeah, it's out there now. She let out a shaky laugh. Then we just declared war. Ben stared at the flames on the horizon. No, we ended one. But as they turned to head back toward the road, the glow of headlights appeared again. Not from enemies this time, but from a single familiar vehicle. A small figure jumped out. Tommy, his jacket too big, his eyes wide with relief. Dad, Ben froze. Tommy. The boy ran into his arms, sobbing. I saw the fire. I thought you, Ben, held him tight, the ache in his chest breaking open. I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Diana smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Looks like your wingman found you. Ben looked toward the horizon, where the fire still burned bright defiant against the dark. Maybe that's how truth works, he said quietly. It burns, but it shows the way home. And as the three of them stood there, father, son, and soldier, the night wind carried the scent of smoke and hope, rising together into a sky that finally seemed ready for dawn. The fire from the collapsed relay tower still flickered on the horizon long after dawn broke. Smoke drifted lazily across the coastal ridge, its scent carried for miles, a mixture of burned steel, salt, and victory. For the first time in years, Ben Turner felt something heavier than fear lift from his chest. The truth was no longer buried. It was out there, alive, unstoppable. He sat beside the shore, watching his son skip stones across the gray water, while Commander Diana Brooks stood a few feet away, scanning the horizon through a pair of binoculars. The morning air hummed with tension, but also with a fragile sense of peace. You really think it went everywhere? She asked quietly. Ben nodded. Every active network with a military relay. Every independent channel that could pick up encrypted transmissions. Once it hit the naval archives, it went public in less than 3 minutes. Diana lowered the binoculars, exhaling. Then it's over. Ben shook his head. No, it's beginning. By mid-morning, news outlets across the country exploded with the story. Leaked documents, encrypted files, and audio records from the PX-09 program flooded the media. Anchors spoke the names of pilots who had died during the early testing names that had been erased for years. And over every network, one image repeated a grainy photo of Ben Turner standing in front of a burning tower, his son clinging to his arm, and a Navy commander beside him. He hadn't wanted fame, but fate had a way of dragging heroes into the light. At the same time, inside the Pentagon's secure conference hall, chaos reigned. Officials barked orders across phones. Analysts sifted through terabytes of leaked data. Every thread pointed to one man, Colonel David Blake, head of experimental operations, the architect of the cover-up. And while the higher ranks scrambled to protect themselves, the Navy's Office of Oversight quietly scheduled an emergency tribunal. A tribunal that would demand both Ben Turner and Commander Brooks testify. That night, under strict escort, the two of them were flown to Washington, D.C. The contrast between their exhaustion and the cold formality of the Capitol was striking. Where the coast had smelled of salt and smoke here, everything reeked of polished marble and secrets. Tommy stayed with a family friend from Diana's old unit, safe. Finally, though, the boy had insisted on one thing before Ben left. Dad, he'd said, gripping his father's hand tightly, if they ask what happened, don't let them call you a bad guy. Ben had smiled. I won't. But remember, doing the right thing doesn't always look good to everyone. Tommy had frowned, thinking, then whispered, it does to me. Those words stayed with Ben as he and Diana walked into the tribunal chamber the next morning. The hall was vast, a semicircle of brass and glass, with the Navy's seal gleaming under fluorescent light. Rows of officers filled the seats, their expressions carved from stone. At the center sat Admiral Graves, presiding judge, flanked by 2 senior officers and a civilian representative from the Defense Ethics Committee. Diana stood straight beside Ben, her dress uniform pressed, her medals polished. He, by contrast, wore a simple gray suit, one borrowed from an old friend, too formal for the man who once mopped hangar floors. The Admiral's voice was cold and steady. "Mr. Turner." "Commander Brooks. You are both here regarding the classified materials leaked to public networks on November 3rd. Do you understand the gravity of these charges?" Ben answered first. "We understand the gravity of what was being hidden, sir." A murmur rippled through the audience. The Admiral's gaze sharpened. "You admit you initiated the breach?" Diana stepped forward. "I did, and I would do it again." The Admiral's lips thinned. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the system failed its people," she said firmly. "Pilots were sent to their deaths under falsified reports. Data was manipulated to hide corporate negligence. And Colonel Blake. Colonel Blake interrupted one of the senior officers is under arrest pending investigation. His actions will be judged separately." Diana's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Then judge us by the same measure you promised him truth." Ben was called next. He took the stand, the bright overhead lights reflecting off the polished table. "State your name and occupation," one officer demanded. "Benjamin Carter Turner. Civilian contractor. Custodial maintenance." A whisper ran through the crowd. The Admiral leaned forward, and before that, Ben hesitated. "U.S. Air Force Captain. Call sign Harbor 6. A beat of silence followed recognition spreading across the room, like a spark catching dry wood. "You left the service 6 years ago," the Admiral said. Why, Ben looked up, his voice calm, steady. "Because my wife died testing a system I warned was unsafe. Because men like Blake buried her death under technical jargon. And because every time I looked in the mirror after that, I saw a coward who didn't fight hard enough to stop it." The chamber was silent. He continued, his tone quieter now, but cutting. "I mopped floors because I couldn't stand the sight of the sky anymore. I thought if I stayed invisible I could keep my son safe. But you can't hide from what's right. Not forever." He met the Admiral's gaze. "I didn't leak those files to humiliate this country. I did it to save what's left of its honor." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the civilian representative, a gray-haired woman with clear, tired eyes, leaned forward. "Mr. Turner, what do you want from this tribunal?" Ben thought of Tommy, of Diana, of Emily's photo on his nightstand, now lost to the fire. "I don't want anything," he said finally, "just for the truth to stay standing when the smoke clears." The next day, the verdict came. The tribunal ruled the PX-09 program illegal, its funding to be terminated. Colonel Blake was stripped of rank and placed under federal investigation. Commander Diana Brooks was cleared of charges and formally commended for moral courage. As for Ben Turner, his case was under review, but quietly word spread through the ranks. The janitor who saved a pilot had reminded the Navy what honor really looked like. When it was over, Diana found him standing outside the building, looking up at the American flag swaying in the wind. "They're going to offer you reinstatement," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "And I'm going to say, no." Why, he looked toward the horizon, where the sky was the same pale blue he once flew through. "Because I already have my mission." She nodded slowly. "Tommy." He turned to her, his eyes warm. "And maybe teaching a few good men what not to forget." For the first time in months, her smile reached her eyes. "You know, Turner, you might just have saved the Navy." He shook his head. "No, Commander. You did. I just reminded it who it used to be." They stood there for a long moment in the morning light, two soldiers who had traded war for truth, knowing the hardest battles were always fought with conscience, not guns. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of church bells from somewhere in the city. For a moment, the world seemed whole again, And for Ben Turner, that was enough. The sun rose over Washington with the quiet grace of redemption. Dew glistened on the marble steps of the tribunal hall, and the air carried that fragile calm that only follows long storms. For the first time in weeks, Ben Turner slept without fear. He woke in a small guest quarters near the Navy Yard, sunlight warming the corner of the room where his son Tommy slept, curled up with a blanket too big for him. The boy's breathing was soft and steady, the kind of peace Ben had nearly forgotten existed. For a while he simply watched. All the noise of the world, the headlines, the politics, the endless questions faded into the simple rhythm of his son's life. When Tommy finally stirred and blinked awake, he smiled. "Did we win, Dad?" Ben thought about the hearing about the tribunal that had exposed Colonel Blake's lies, about the thousands of messages flooding in from veterans and pilots, thanking them for bringing the truth into daylight. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, kiddo, we did." Later that morning, Ben met Commander Diana Brooks outside the base cafe. She wore her uniform again, but without the formality of rank. No hat, no medals, just the clean navy blue that matched the quiet steadiness in her eyes. "Sleep?" she asked. He chuckled. "A little." Tommy stole most of the blanket. Her smile was small but warm. "He reminds me of my brother. He used to do the same thing during storm drills. They sat at a table overlooking the docks. The harbor was alive again, cranes, swinging sailors moving across decks, the rhythm of normal life resuming. For the first time since the crash, it didn't look like a battlefield." Diana took a sip of coffee and set it down gently. "The media's calling you the silent guardian." Ben groaned. "That's worse than janitor hero." "It's not bad press," she said, amused. "They've already started a petition to award you the Navy Cross." He shook his head. "I don't want medals. I just want to go home." Diana's smile faded slightly. "You still have a home." He looked out at the sea, that same endless expanse that had once nearly claimed his life. "Not anymore." "But I can build one." Her voice softened. "If you ever need help building, I'm a pretty good hand with tools." He met her eyes. The unspoken words between them carried more meaning than any promise could. The next day, the world began to move again. Blake was gone, quietly escorted out of the system he had corrupted. Investigations spread to the contractors involved with Aegis Dynamics, and for the first time in years, real reform began to take root. Reporters called agencies wanted interviews, and journalists camped outside the Navy Yard for glimpses of the man who brought the storm. But Ben avoided the cameras. He spent his mornings with Tommy, teaching him to skim stones on the Potomac River. Sometimes Diana joined them not as Commander Brooks, but as just Diana. She'd kick off her shoes, roll up her sleeves, and laugh when Tommy's stone hit the water with a splash instead of a skip. Life for the first time felt ordinary again. One afternoon, Admiral Graves himself approached Ben on the docks. "Captain Turner," he said formally. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Haven't heard that title in a long time." Graves smiled faintly. "It still fits." He handed Ben a sealed envelope embossed with the Navy crest. "The Department of Defense has reviewed your record. They're offering reinstatement advisory position Aviation Safety Division. Civilian rank, full honors restored." Ben turned the envelope in his hands but didn't open it. "I appreciate it, Admiral," he said slowly, "but I think I've done my flying." Graves studied him for a long moment. "Maybe. But you've also proven something we all needed to remember." "What's that?" "That truth doesn't destroy the Navy. It saves it." The two men shook hands, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. When the Admiral walked away, Ben finally opened the envelope. Inside, along with the offer, was a single commendation letter written in Diana's hand. It read, "To the man who reminded us that honor isn't worn on a uniform, it's lived." That evening, as twilight settled over the bay, Ben and Diana sat outside the cafe again, watching the lights of the harbor flicker like scattered stars. Tommy ran along the pier chasing seagulls, laughter echoing through the cooling air. "He's healing," Diana said softly. "So am I," Ben replied. She looked at him, the reflection of the water dancing in her eyes. "You could have walked away from all of this. Why didn't you?" Ben thought for a long moment. "Because silence helps the wrong people." I was done being silent. Her expression softened. "You know I think you'd make a good teacher," he smiled. "Funny you say that. The Air Academy sent an invitation this morning. They want me to give a guest lecture on ethics in flight testing." "That's perfect for you," she said, genuinely pleased. He shrugged. "They'll regret it once they hear how bad I am at PowerPoint." Diana laughed, a real unguarded laugh that carried farther than the sea breeze. As the last light faded, Tommy came running up, holding something in his small hands. "Dad, look what I made." Ben crouched, smiling as the boy revealed a small wooden plaque. It was rough and uneven letters carved by hand. The words read, "Heroes don't shout. They show up." Ben's throat tightened. "Where'd you hear that?" "You said it once," Tommy said proudly. "I just remembered." Diana looked at the plaque and then at Ben. "He's got your heart." Ben smiled, eyes glistening in the dusk. "No, he's got his own. I just get to guide it." Later that night, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Ben walked down to the edge of the water. The reflection of the Capitol lights shimmered across the surface. Behind him, footsteps approached softly. Diana joined him, her hands tucked into her jacket. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. Flying Ben thought about it. The roar of the engines, the sky unfolding beneath his wings, the impossible silence above the clouds. "Sometimes," he said. "But now I get to watch the sky from the ground, knowing I left it better than I found it." She smiled, standing beside him. "That's enough, isn't it?" He nodded. "It's more than enough." They stood in silence, the wind cool against their faces, the city lights glimmering like distant stars. For once there was no sound of sirens, no hum of pursuit, only the quiet peace of two souls who had fought their war and found something gentler waiting on the other side. The following spring came quietly to the eastern shore, not with fanfare, but with that subtle grace that only people who have known storms can truly notice. The cherry trees near the Navy Academy were in bloom, again, soft petals drifting across the air like snowflakes, landing on the calm water of the harbor. For Ben Turner, this place no longer held the weight of ghosts. It held something else, now purpose. It had been nearly a year since the tribunal, since the fires and the headlines, since the morning when truth finally rose above the lies. In that time, Ben had quietly turned down every award, every interview, every attempt to make him a symbol. He didn't want to be remembered as the janitor who saved the Navy. He wanted to be remembered as a father who kept his word to his son, to himself, and to the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. The Naval Academy's new aviation safety program opened that week, a project born from the ashes of the PX-09 scandal. Its purpose was simple: train future engineers and pilots to build and test with integrity, to ensure that no system, no machine, no ambition ever outweighed a single human life. Ben stood on the edge of the hangar floor that morning, wearing a simple work shirt and holding a clipboard, watching a group of cadets inspect the shell of an old training jet. "Remember," he said, his voice calm but firm, "the job isn't about making planes fly. It's about making sure people come home." One of the younger cadets raised a hand. "Sir, were you really part of the PX investigation?" Ben smiled faintly. "Let's just say I learned a lot about what happens when good people stop asking hard questions." The cadet nodded, thoughtful. As the class dispersed, Ben knelt beside the jet and ran his hand across its metallic skin. For a moment he could almost hear Emily's laughter, soft and steady, echoing in the hangar's vastness. He had once thought her voice would haunt him forever. Now it simply guided him. At noon, as he stepped out into the sunlight, he saw a familiar figure waiting by the gate. Commander Diana Brooks, though today she wasn't in uniform. She wore a light coat, her hair tied back and the wind eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses. But when she saw him, she smiled that same quiet, honest smile that had once cut through the chaos of gunfire and smoke. "Still cleaning hangars," she teased. Ben chuckled. "Still outranking me, I see." "I resigned last month," she said, almost casually. 12 years of service. "I think it's time I fly free." He raised a brow. "Any plans?" She looked toward the sea. "Teaching, maybe. There's something about showing the next generation what honor really means that feels right." Ben nodded slowly. "Yeah, it does." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind off the harbor carried the sound of seagulls and distant engines. Life, ordinary, beautiful, alive, went on. Then Diana turned back to him. "You know, I never did get to say thank you." He smiled. "You already did." "No," she said softly. "I mean it. You didn't just save my life. You reminded me why I chose this path in the first place. For truth, for decency, for people like you." Ben met her gaze, his voice gentle. "And you reminded me that I wasn't done fighting yet." The unspoken warmth between them lingered, not the fire of impulse, but the slow, steady glow of mutual respect, of something deeper that didn't need to be named. That evening, the Academy held a small dedication ceremony. The new Flight Safety Wing had been named the Turner Memorial Hangar, though Ben hadn't known until he saw the sign. When Admiral Graves called his name to speak, he hesitated for a moment before stepping up to the podium. The crowd, cadets, officers, engineers, and a few journalists fell silent. He began quietly, his voice carrying over the gentle hum of the harbor. "I used to think my life ended the day I left the cockpit. When the people you love are taken by something you trusted, it changes the way you see the sky. For years I told myself I was finished, that I didn't deserve to be part of this world anymore. But then one day, I saw a jet go down, and I didn't think. I just moved." He paused, the memory flashing the cold water, the glass shattering the weight of another life in his arms. That day, he continued. "I realized something: you can run from your past, but not from your conscience. And when you stop running, that's when you start living again." He looked out at the rows of young cadets. "All of you standing here, you're the future. You'll hold the lives of others in your hands. Don't ever let ambition or fear make you forget what that means." Then his gaze found Diana at the edge of the crowd, and for a brief second, the noise faded away. "And remember, this sometimes saving one person can lift a whole world." The applause that followed was quiet at first, then rose like a tide. After the ceremony, the three of them, Ben, Diana, and Tommy, walked along the dock as the sun set. The light turned the water into liquid gold, and the air smelled of fuel and salt, and something almost holy. Tommy held their hands, one in each, chattering about his school project on aircraft safety. "I told my teacher my dad teaches pilots. Now," he said proudly. "She didn't believe me." Ben smiled. "She will when she sees the news tomorrow." Diana laughed. "Let's hope she gives him extra credit." As they reached the end of the pier, 5 Humvees rolled quietly to a stop at the Academy's front gates, this time not in pursuit, not in anger, but as an honor guard. Their insignia gleamed in the sunset. Operation Honor. Tommy tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad, they're here for you." Ben looked at the convoy for a long moment, then down at his son. "No, buddy," he said softly. "They're here for everyone who stood for what's right." He looked toward Diana, whose eyes reflected the fading light. She smiled and whispered, "The sea's calm again." "Yeah," Ben said, his voice steady. "It's time it was." As night fell, the harbor lights shimmered across the still water. Ben Turner stood with his family, not of blood, but of choice, and felt something he hadn't known in years: peace. Not the kind that hides from the world, but the kind that comes after you've faced it and chosen to forgive. Above them, the stars began to appear one by one, their reflections trembling gently on the water's surface, reminders that even in the darkest nights, light always finds a way back. And as the wind carried the sound of the waves across the dock, Ben whispered to himself the words that had carried him through every trial, every loss, every dawn after fire. Kindness is never small. Sometimes saving one person can lift a whole world. The sea answered in silence, steady, eternal, alive. And this time, it was not morning. It was home. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Tell us your city or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how stories of kindness and courage reach hearts all around the world. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more heartfelt tales that remind us all that hope, honor, and love still matter. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Stay kind, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next story.